The first thing I learned about grief is that it makes room for predators. We were still under the cold hush of the cemetery when Victoria leaned in, close enough for her perfume to sting my eyes, and whispered, "Don't expect a cent from your grandfather's will." I felt the funeral program shiver in my hands, heard the wind comb the new grass, and watched pity flicker across the faces of strangers as she smirked like the world already belonged to her. Then Benjamin Hayes, my grandfather's attorney, stepped forward, his voice even and unmistakable. Actually, there is one more item left. For the first time that day, the ground steadied beneath me. My grandfather, Richard Parker, had been a builder of cities, and more importantly, the builder of my life after I lost my parents. I grew up in the quiet pocket of his study among cedar and leather, and the soft click of his gold watch learning chess, and the difference between power and wisdom. He could sign deals worth billions of dollars, then kneel to help me plant zinnias, whispering that soil is where true wealth begins. Victoria never understood it. To her marriage to Richard was a key to a vault, not a door into a family. She liked champagne and polished invitations, not scholarships, not after-school programs, not the way he cried quietly when I broke my leg and tried to hide the pain from both of us. After the burial, the mourners thinned into the parking lot and the March wind turned my coat into paper. I pressed my palm to his new headstone and promised to guard what his name meant. That promise met its first trial before the sky even lost its gray. When I reached the estate, 3 suitcases with my initials were stacked on the marble steps like props in a play that had already been rehearsed. Victoria opened the door in a silk robe and a red smile and told me the house was hers, the accounts were hers, the future was hers, and that respect is for the living. She waved a document under the porch light, a residency agreement with my grandfather's unmistakable signature, and a clause ending the moment his heart did. 15 minutes, she said, and security would escort a squatter from the premises. She watched me read it with the indulgence you give a child still sounding out words, then shut the door with a deliberate thud that echoed in the bones of the house I loved. It rained all the way to the Lakeview Inn. The neon out front blinked like an eyelid refusing to stay open, and room 112 smelled faintly of bleach cigarettes in a previous decade. I set my luggage down and finally let the sobs grab hold, asking the ceiling why a man who taught me prudence and mercy would sign anything that left me to the weather. Memory fought back with his laugh, his chess lessons, his warning that a queen without patience loses the board. I was still listening for that voice when the rotary phone rang sharp as a pin in the quiet. No one knew where I was. I answered anyway. "Ms. Parker," the voice said low and steady, "this is Benjamin Hayes." He told me my grandfather had anticipated difficulties, that he had left instructions that he had arranged for me to be found if I was pushed aside. He would not discuss details by phone, only that the will would be read on Friday at 2 p.m., and that I must arrive with my strength intact. His calm threaded a line through the storm inside me, and when the call ended, I sat with the receiver against my ear, feeling a small, stubborn rise of hope. If my grandfather had planned for Victoria's cruelty, then he had left me more than memories. He had left me a map. The week stretched sleepless and bright with headlines that did not yet exist, but that my mind kept writing in cruel fonts. I wore the same black suit twice and ironed it with a motel blow-dryer. I bought coffee in paper cups and stared at the reflection of my own breath on the window, repeating the same sentence until it became a drumbeat. He thought of everything. I kept hearing him say, "The queen is the most powerful piece, but she must move wisely." I practiced wisdom by doing very little, no calls to reporters, no angry posts, no midnight emails. I gathered bank statements, old letters, the scholarship programs, and the names of people who had known him longer than any marriage ring had. I reminded myself that patience is not passivity, it is strategy disguised as stillness. On Friday, the city glittered as if winter had been polished. I rode an elevator to the 28th floor where the carpet thickened underfoot and the glass turned the skyline into a chessboard. Hayes's office felt like the kind of room where decisions become law. Mahogany shelves climbed the walls, and the air held a scent like good paper and fresh coffee. When I stepped into the conference room, Victoria was already there, draped in a black suit that cut her like a blade and crowned her like a queen. At her side, a sharp-faced attorney set a leather briefcase on the table with the ceremony of a gavel. Victoria looked at me with a languid glance that said she had already won, then murmured, "Brave of you to come when disappointment is inevitable." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say that would not spend energy I needed to save. Hayes entered with a slim stack of folders, silver hair catching the light face, unreadable and kind all at once. Behind him, Mr. Lewis, my grandfather's old partner, stood with his arms folded like a guardrail. Beside him was Margaret Ellis, our housekeeper. For 3 decades, the woman who taught me to tie an apron and tell the truth even when it stains. The room settled. Hayes opened the will and spoke in a cadence that let the words carry their own weight, promising to honor Richard Parker's exact wishes, warning that what followed would demand our full attention. Across the table, I watched the smallest crack bloom at the corner of Victoria's perfect smile, and I understood why my grandfather always said to watch the edges first. The center reveals itself last. Hayes began with the simple part, the kind of details that feed gossip columns and family feuds alike. To my beloved wife, Victoria Parker, he read, "I leave the family residence on Maplewood Drive, along with its furnishings, vehicles, and joint bank accounts." A soft hum of satisfaction escaped Victoria as she crossed her legs, the faintest click of her heels, punctuating every syllable of my grandfather's generosity. She leaned toward me, whispering just loud enough for the witnesses to hear, "See, darling, as promised, nothing for you." I kept my hands folded in my lap knuckles, white beneath the table. My grandfather had once told me that silence can be louder than any protest when truth is about to enter the room. Hayes cleared his throat, his calm composure unmoved. "That concludes the preliminary bequests," he said, turning a page. "Now the remaining provisions." The air shifted. Even Victoria's attorney straightened. Hayes glanced briefly at me, then continued his tone, heavier, deliberate. "To my granddaughter, Sophia Parker, who has stood by me with loyalty and love, I leave 50% of Parker Global Holdings, including all voting rights shares and dividends." The words hung like a struck bell. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. My pulse thundered in my ears as the sentence landed fully in my mind. Half. He had given me half of his empire, half of the billions of dollars in skyscrapers and contracts, half of the voice that decided the company's future. Victoria's composure shattered. "This is absurd," she hissed, rising so abruptly her chair scraped the floor. "She's a child. She can't possibly understand what she's been handed." Hayes didn't blink. Mr. Parker was explicit. He trusted her judgment and integrity. Furthermore, Miss Parker inherits all personal effects of sentimental value, his watches, his library, and oversight of the Parker Charitable Foundation. My breath caught. The gold watch, the scent of cedar and old paper. Every hour he spent teaching me about compassion hidden beneath the armor of power. Those weren't trinkets. They were pieces of his soul. Victoria's lawyer tugged at her sleeve, whispering for calm, but Victoria's fury had already turned volcanic. He was manipulated. She poisoned him against me while he was dying, she shouted. I found my voice before I could lose my nerve. "Don't you dare rewrite the truth. Grandpa knew you loved his money, not him, and now everyone else knows it too." A ripple of discomfort ran through the witnesses, but Margaret Ellis straightened her voice steady. Mr. Parker wrote every word himself, Mrs. Parker. He was sharp until his final day. Mr. Lewis nodded beside her. Richard anticipated every outcome. He knew exactly who he was dealing with. For a moment, Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a wound that refused to heal. Then she sneered, trying to regain her footing. You may have paper, Sophia, but I have the house, the staff, the power. You're nothing without me. Hayes raised a single hand, halting her mid-sentence. Actually, Mrs. Parker, he said, voice crisp as a snapped line, there is one final clause. He pulled a sealed folder from the stack, its corners marked by my grandfather's handwriting. It was added 3 weeks before his passing and is to be read only after the main bequests. The silence returned dense and waiting. Victoria sat back down, slowly suspicion flashing across her face. Hayes unfolded the document. If my wife, Victoria Parker, he began, his gaze flicking toward her, should attempt to remove my granddaughter Sophia Parker from the family estate within 1 year of my death, all assets previously granted to her, including the mansion vehicles and joint bank accounts, shall be revoked and transferred to Sophia Parker in full. The words detonated like thunder in the polished room. My breath hitched. The humiliation, the rain, the suitcases on the marble steps. Suddenly, every cruelty had a witness in ink. This is outrageous, Victoria cried, half rising again. No court will uphold such a ridiculous clause. Hayes remained still, letting her rage crash and fall against the calm. Conditional bequests are perfectly legal, he said. This one was witnessed, notarized, and accompanied by a video statement from Mr. Parker himself. He slid a copy across the table. Your husband wanted absolute clarity. I couldn't move. I could only hear the echo of Victoria's words that night. 15 minutes, Sophia. The same 15 minutes that had just cost her everything. You can't prove it, she shouted. She left willingly. I stood trembling but grounded. You locked me out, Victoria. You said I was nothing. You said respect was for the living. The witnesses exchanged knowing looks. Mr. Lewis spoke quietly. Richard knew exactly who you were, Victoria. That's why he left a safeguard. Hayes pressed a button on the small monitor built into the table. The screen flickered to life, and my grandfather's face appeared thinner, older, but bright, with that unmistakable steadiness. The sound of his voice drew the room into stillness. If you're watching this, it means my wife has chosen greed over love, he said, tone, even eyes clear. Victoria, I gave you loyalty and you repaid me with deceit. Sophia, my dear girl, remember what I taught you. Power without compassion destroys itself. You are my true heir, not because of blood, but because of heart. I felt tears sting but refused to look away. My grandfather smiled faintly before the video faded. If Victoria drives you from your home, she forfeits every gift I once gave her. Our legacy belongs only to those who understand love's worth. The screen went black. Silence followed, thick, final, complete. Victoria's hand trembled on the table edge. He was dying, she whispered. He didn't know what he was saying. Hayes met her gaze evenly. His physician certified full mental clarity. This clause is binding and already triggered. My chest swelled with disbelief, and something new, relief, edged with justice. Victoria's denial collapsed into a scream, then into silence. Her knees buckled, and she fainted into her lawyer's arms. For the first time since the funeral, I felt my grandfather's presence settle over me, not as memory, but as armor. The weeks that followed were a storm disguised as paperwork. The tabloids feasted on our names, the widow and the heir, the empire of betrayal, the girl who outsmarted high society. I avoided them all. The truth didn't need headlines, it needed patience. Victoria, however, thrived on spectacle. She hired the best attorneys money could buy, claimed the will was forged, claimed undue influence, claimed I had manipulated a dying man. In court, she arrived draped in black veils, clutching tissues like props. But each time, Benjamin Hayes dismantled her narrative with quiet precision. Witnesses testified. Doctors confirmed my grandfather's clarity of mind. The video of his final message played on the courtroom's wide screen, silencing every whispered doubt until only truth remained. When the gavel finally struck, the sound echoed like release. The judge ruled every clause valid, every signature authentic. All of Richard Parker's estate mansion assets and holdings belonged to me. Victoria was ordered to vacate the property immediately. She didn't look like the woman who had once taunted me beside a grave. Her face was pale, eyes hollow, her confidence stripped bare. I stood in the marble foyer as she passed, dragging her designer suitcase, her perfume lingering behind like the ghost of arrogance. For a brief, fragile second, pity brushed my heart. Then I remembered her laughter in the rain, the way she had closed the door in my face while I begged for shelter. Justice didn't always wear kindness, and forgiveness could wait for another lifetime. When the front doors shut behind her, the mansion fell quiet for the first time in years. Dust hung like sunlight's breath across the grand staircase. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch me, their painted eyes, waiting to see what kind of Parker I would become. I placed my palm against the polished banister where Grandpa's hand once rested and whispered, "I'm home." It wasn't victory I felt. It was inheritance not of money, but of duty. I spent days walking through every room, uncovering the small traces he'd left behind. The study smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. His chessboard still held a game mid-match, one black queen standing alone. In his desk drawer lay a note I had never seen before, written in his firm, looping script. "Remember, Sophia, every empire survives by the integrity of its heart. Guard that first." I pressed the paper to my chest and knew the empire he meant wasn't made of glass towers or gold accounts. It was made of people. So I began rebuilding it the way he would have wanted. The Richard Parker Scholarship Fund launched within a month, offering full tuition for students from struggling families, the same children he had once knelt to encourage. Newspapers began printing different headlines now: the billionaire's granddaughter who gave back, the new face of Parker Global. The boardroom, once a battlefield of old voices and older egos, transformed slowly under new leadership. Some executives doubted me. At first, their glances sharp with skepticism. I met every one of them with steady eyes and the same words: "The Queen plays wisely, or not at all." Every morning at 7 a.m., I sat in his study, coffee steaming beside his watch, reviewing reports and letters from foundation recipients. I wrote personal notes to each student the way he used to, reminding them that success wasn't measured by wealth, but by what you did with it. The more I gave, the more I understood the weight of what he had left me. It wasn't the empire. It was the blueprint of integrity. Yet sometimes, in the stillness between meetings, I caught myself expecting his voice. I'd glance toward the doorway, half hoping he'd appear, sleeves rolled ready to lecture me about patience, over passion strategy, over impulse. The silence that followed was never cruel. It was simply full, as if he was still there, watching. One evening, after a long board session that had stretched past 9 p.m., I returned to his study to find the old gold watch lying on the desk, exactly where he'd always placed it after every victory. The hands pointed to 9:15 p.m., frozen in time. I slid it onto my wrist, the metal cool against my skin, and felt something steady ignite in my chest. Outside, the city glowed like a constellation of chances, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the responsibility. Victoria had once said respect was for the living. She was right in one sense, but she never understood that legacy is too. The living honor it by carrying forward what the dead once stood for. I looked out across the skyline that bore my grandfather's name and whispered, "You built towers, Grandpa. I'll build bridges." If you believe strength can grow out of heartbreak, if you've ever been underestimated and still found your way home, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below and tell me, what would you protect if it was all you had left?